When the Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776, it was the work of many hands. The people of more than 90 towns and counties throughout the colonies had sent instructions to the Continental Congress calling for separation from England and enumerating a list of grievances to justify independence from the empire. Pennsylvania was one of the first states to draft a constitution during the War for Independence, even before the Articles of Confederation was proposed in 1777. Pennsylvania's Constitution of 1776 reflected much of the radical tone, tenor, and intent of the people who fought the British at Trenton and Lexington. 11 days after the signing of the Declaration, a revolutionary committee convened in Philadelphia to craft a constitution for the Commonwealth. Its drafters were men of no means who were denied the right to vote and hold office under British colonial rule because they owned no land. They had descended on Philadelphia to terrify the Do-Nothing Quaker Party, representing the majority in the Penn family's royally chartered Colonial General Assembly. They demanded the conservatives abandon their seats because the body cherished trade with England more than liberty, and they would not agree to independence. Without Pennsylvania, other key colonies also balked at rebellion. Fresh from their coup against the colonial government, the victorious rabble sat down in the chairs abandoned by the terrified Quaker delegates to write their constitution for an independent Pennsylvania. They gave it a preamble and a Declaration of Rights that acknowledged the people's inalienable right to what they explicitly called community self-government. The new People's General Assembly intended to immediately address the first grievance mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, the King's denial of the right of communities to govern themselves by making and enforcing just laws. Looking back on history free from nationalistic distortion, we are also free to wonder what might have been if the democratizing efforts of the radicals had survived the Federalists' counter-revolution. What if communities today had the right to self-determination, especially against corporate assaults in the form of frack waste, industrial timber operations, destructive mining, or data center proliferation? That 1776 Pennsylvania constitutional preamble said, quote, "Whereas all government ought to be instituted and supported for the security and protection of the community as such, and to enable the individuals who compose it to enjoy their natural rights and the other blessings which the author of existence has bestowed upon man. And whenever these great ends of government are not obtained, the people have a right by common consent to change it, and take such measures as to them may appear necessary to promote their safety and happiness." End quote. Where have we heard that before? Oh yes, the Declaration of Independence itself. And it turns out that if you take a peek at just about any state constitution today, Article 1, Section 1, or thereabouts, is likely to contain similar language related to the purpose of government and the duty of the people to challenge or abolish government when it no longer serves the people's interest. The New Hampshire Constitution defines it as the right of revolution. Those inspiring remnants of now defunct community rights are evidence of the once passionate spirit of '76, but today they feel more like ancient fossils embedded in the sediment of intervening history. Democracy in the new Pennsylvania Commonwealth was secured in the institution of government, not just in the Declaration of Rights. With Benjamin Franklin assisting the constitutional framers, they established a unicameral assembly of lawmakers, rejecting the hierarchical setup we know as Congress, with a House of Representatives for a lower house and an upper house or Senate made up of patriarchs, able to override the popularly elected representatives in the lower. They also rejected the idea of a strong executive or government with power to veto the people's will. Instead, they created an executive council consisting of 12 persons chosen by the freemen of the counties of the Commonwealth, having staggered terms of office and each subject to term limits. The 1776 Pennsylvania Constitution addressed the judicial power in a more remarkable way. They established no Supreme Court. As they had done by foregoing a Senate and governor, they kept the power to judge the fitness of laws close to the people. they created a council of censors, with members elected from each city and county, quote, whose duty it shall be to inquire whether the Constitution has been preserved inviolate in every part, and whether the legislative and executive branches of government have performed their duty as guardians of the people, or assumed to themselves or exercise other great powers than they are entitled to by the Constitution, end quote. They went on to explain the specific powers retained by the people to oversee their government through the Council of Censors. It empowered them to audit how taxes were spent and whether the laws they approved had been exercised or ignored. The People's Council had subpoena powers to demand government records, and through it, they had the power to initiate impeachments, censure legislators, and demand laws not in agreement with the Constitution be repealed. The 1776 Pennsylvania Constitution removed property-owning qualifications to vote and hold public office for men over 21 years of age, living in the Commonwealth for at least 1 year, and who had paid taxes. It was a right that did not exclude men of any race or heritage, so long as they were not enslaved or indentured. That provision would endure until the second constitutional reformulation in 1838, when the word white was inserted into the document to make it fit in with the apartheid policies of the 1789 Federal Constitution. But even before then, the first Constitution of the Commonwealth was already, in 1776, a racist constitution that tolerated genocidal expansion into inhabited indigenous lands, enslavement and commodification of Black people, and loss of rights imposed on debtors in order to fortify the privileges of creditors. It also goes without saying that women were by default utterly and silently excluded at all levels. The immigration policy established by the 1776 Pennsylvania Constitution probably won't be memorialized during the Trump administration's America 250 celebrations. The revolutionary approach was somewhat different. The revolutionaries wrote, "Every foreigner of good character who comes to settle in the state, having first taken an oath or affirmation of allegiance, may purchase or by other just means acquire, hold, and transfer land or other real estate, and after 1 year's residence shall be deemed a free denizen thereof, and entitled to all the rights of a natural-born subject of this state, except that he shall not be capable of being elected a representative until after 2 years' residence," end quote. The young Commonwealth adopted the rudiments of environmentalism in 1777, and though it had many serious flaws, the 1776 Pennsylvania Constitution formed a more democratic framing of government than any that followed, including and far surpassing the U.S. Constitution. According to Robert L. Brunhaus in his book, The Counter-Revolution in Pennsylvania, after the Federalists pushed aggressively for ratification of the U.S. Constitution in 1789, Pennsylvania's democracy was overturned in 1790. A replacement constitution that complied closely with the highly centralized national government was successfully advocated by the resurgent conservative power in the Commonwealth. A vetoing Senate was established. The Executive Council of Citizens was disbanded and replaced by a vetoing governor, and a Supreme Court with absolute power over the people's government muscled out the Council of Censors. According to Angus Harwood Brown, quote, "The idea that the Constitution could be enforced against the legislative branch by an independent constitutional guardian was rejected at the Federal Convention precisely because of its framers' antipathy to Pennsylvania's radically democratic Constitution," end quote. Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire followed Pennsylvania's example of democratizing through the institutions of government. When the Federalists gathered secretly in Philadelphia in 1787 to devise a replacement for the Articles of Confederation, James Madison declared that the 13 separate nations must lose their sovereignty to a central government, saying that, quote, "The states at present are only great corporations, having the power of making bylaws, effectual only if they are not contradictory to the general confederation. the states ought to be placed under the control of the general government at least as much so as they formerly were under the King and British Parliament, end quote. The rest of the delegates agreed and created a frame of government for that purpose, oblivious that the people they proposed to govern had just revolted against the British-style subjugation that the Federalists were championing to replace it. Historian Charles A. Beard wrote that, quote, "Under the Articles of Confederation, populism had a free hand, for majorities in the state legislatures were omnipotent. Anyone who reads the economic history of the time will see why the solid conservative interests of the country were weary of the talk about the rights of the people and were bent upon establishing firm guarantees for the rights of property," end quote. While lobbying for the reduction of the states to the status of corporations under a new constitution, the Federalists threatened to break apart those states like Rhode Island that refused to support their plans for a commercial monopoly over government. In the end, community-controlled government was overturned. The trajectory of democratic revolution was reversed, and the all but unknown history of revolutionary governance during the War for Independence and before the Articles of Confederation were overturned was buried for 250 years, out of sight of the people who had been outmaneuvered and betrayed. This is the 5th video short in CELDF's America 250, a Revolutionary Perspective series. You can catch up at our Truth and Reckoning Substack and stay current by following us at CELDF.org. If you'd like to support our work, consider donating. Again, that's at CELDF.org.